Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Lipp. I'm the Festival Director here at Big Apple Film Festival, and welcome to our Film and Screenwriting Conference. We're very excited, it's our first year doing a conference, so I'm going to introduce our speakers. So we have Sydney Foos from Killer Films, we have Josh Folan, producer, we have Loretta Harms, filmmaker, Matt Levine from Endeavor Content, Jacob Kreuger, screenwriter, Alyssa Rowell-Bennett, filmmaker. Okay, got everyone. Yes, okay, so everyone come on up. So, first I'm just going to ask each of these, I'm going to ask each of the speakers to introduce themselves so you know who everyone is.
I picked the wrong seat. Hi everybody, I'm Loretta Harms and I have a company called Moto Cinema, and we're an independent film company. I'm the executive producer and producer of a film called Lambert and Stan. The untold story of the managers of the band The Who. And we premiered at Sundance and we are out with Sony Classics.
I'm Sydney Foos and work as a development executive at Killer Films.
You can hold that, and then I'll pass. I'm Alyssa Rowell-Bennett. I'm a producer and a director and the co-founder of Stone Street Studios in Chelsea.
Hi there, I'm Matt Levin. I run Endeavor Content Live, which is Endeavor's in-house live event touring and production company. So we license a lot of films, and the core of our business is films in concert where you're watching a screen. The soundtrack is played by a live symphony on stage, and it's paired very nicely.
I'm Jacob Kreuger. I run a screenwriting school on 35th and 8th called Jacob Kreuger Studio, where we really specialize in mentorship. We pair you one-on-one with a professional writer, and that person will mentor you through every phase of your career. And I also have a free podcast, Write Your Screenplay Podcast, which you can find on my website, writeyourscreenplay.com.
My name is Josh Folan. I'm an independent producer. I've been working for a little over a decade. I write, direct as well, and I guess I'm here most notably because I had a feature that played Jonathan's Festival in February that's coming out Friday night at Village East Cinema as the start of its theatrical deal through Level Film. Ask for Jane, did I say that?
I'm actually going to jump over here. Okay. Oh, that's all right. No problem. All right. So the panel is called "Building Your Audience," right? And one of the most challenging parts of making a film, of course, is finding your audience, building your audience, and nowadays with a marketplace that's so incredibly saturated with content, finding that audience and building it from the beginning can be quite challenging. So my first question for all the panelists is, what are some strategies for building your audience prior to even the start of production? When you just have a script, or if it's a documentary, a concept, how do you build that audience really from day one, before you even begin production, or even begin raising financing?
Well, in the case of Ask for Jane, we were kind of blessed, unknowingly in the beginning. It's about a group of young women who started a legal abortion network. It's inspired by true events. Started a legal abortion network in the late 60s, early 70s at the University of Chicago. So while we did not know that when we started developing it in late 2015, I guess it was, or no, late 2016, the political climate has changed a lot since then, and that subject matter is wildly topical now. So the easiest answer to that question is get really lucky and choose something that is going to become a socially relevant topic that everyone's already going to be interested in. I mean, we have had a good response to the film itself, but I mean, there are people who are passionate about our project, our film, before they even have seen it or know what it's about, really, to any great degree. It's just they know we're marketing it as a women's reproductive rights oriented subject matter with a true life component to it, and that kind of sells itself right now, and I know that's an extremely hard thing to project and do, but basically, I guess the better answer would be to have the material you're choosing needs to have some relevance or some significance, and not just be a story that you're trying to tell because you want to tell a story. You can try that, but it's a lot harder. I've done that too.
I come from it from a writing perspective and from a teaching perspective. But I'd say the most important thing is write something that matters to you. Like you were saying, if it doesn't matter to you, if it's just a way of making money, right? If it's just a hot idea that you think people will buy, it's going to be very hard to build an audience. And it's going to be very hard to distinguish yourself from the other people trying to do the same thing. So I think success in this industry, just like in anything, comes from going, you know, what really matters to me? What do I want to say? What's the thing keeping me up at night? And then it's about finding people like you, and not trying to write the thing that everyone's going to love, but writing the thing that you love, capturing it exactly the way you see it, that no one else could do, and then trying to find people like you who are passionate about the same thing, or upset about the same thing, or wrestling with the same question.
For me, I'm actually on the buyer standpoint, so a lot of the times when I'm licensing IP, specifically for films and concert, I'm really looking at a lot of different types of analytics. One, how did it sell? Two, who was the composer and how strong was the score within the film? Because a lot of what we're trying to do is highlight the actual music of the film to enhance the live experience and not market it as just a film screening, because who's going to pay $50 to go see a film screening when they can watch it at home for $4 or $5 or just for free on Netflix? So what I'm really looking for as far as when I'm trying to license IP is I really want to target series or these cult movies that have a very big following, and a lot of the time those rights are really well protected. So for a lot of the more niche movies that I'm looking to do, like I had Get Out in Concert, for example, and we licensed it at a great time when it was coming off of a lot of huge press. It was culturally relevant, and it still is, and we can really play into those tones as far as bringing in the original composer, Michael Abels, who serves as our conductor for a lot of our engagements, doing a lot of different types of press around it, and really trying to target core demographics that want to go to this, because they have these things called the Pop Series in North America for symphony halls and for orchestras, where you have an allotted amount of time for playing these more non-traditional events. And you really want to make sure for what you're selling, you're diving deep into the creative, and that you're not just being like, oh, this is a great film and a great score, because people want more. And the market for me has been super saturated, because you have the Harry Potter in concerts, you have Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, all the Disney movies, which unfortunately I can't touch. But for what I want to target, I want to make sure that if it's in more of a niche film or if it's a documentary, what goes into that? What's the score like? How thorough is the theme, and how relevant is it in today's culture? And really targeting shelf life rather than taking a title and hoping that it has a good 6-month run and that's it. I really want to be looking at things that can stay in people's minds and that can continuously sell into the market for years to come.
Yeah, I kind of subscribe to some of the things you were saying. Is I've never made films thinking about the audience or who it was going to sell to. I just had to make a film about secondhand smoke and personal responsibility, and that was like a really difficult film. But on the other hand, it was a niche film, and it found its audience both at festivals and then digitally. And now it's about to find another audience because of being it's going to be on. We're in the middle of negotiating, but and other films that I've made, you know, just were very personal films like Rerun, where Christopher Lloyd gets a second chance to go back in time. That was a film that you guys, thank you, screened. And, you know, because it just seemed like people were not telling the story of what it's like to be old and be isolated and be with your family, and then kind of get a chance to go back and possibly fix mistakes, you know. So that was just personal. And right now I'm developing an anthology series which deals with it's a women's rights anthology series that deals with women's rights issues, and they're all one-offs, and we have people attached, and kind of a smaller version of a film we made called Rain Without Thunder, which dealt with what it would be like if abortion was illegal, and that was another difficult film. But, you know, and sometimes you're lucky with an audience and sometimes you're not. So for example, that film, which was released by Orion Classics, the producers that we worked with held on to the film, tried to make more money from it, and they waited till after Clinton was elected. So at that moment in time, we were not so lucky because it really needed to be released before Clinton was elected. Now it has a new audience because I think it's on Amazon, and it's very relevant again, which is why we are making a kind of a short version of Dot. So I don't know, I like making relevant films and socially, provocative films. That's just me, the rebel in me, and things that really bother me. So I feel like we'll always find our audience. I'm learning always and getting better at it. Also, short form content is changed so much. A long time ago, shorts, nobody knew what to do with them. So my film studio does something called micro movies. And we've kind of branded these micro movies, and they're this beautifully shot, full story films under 10 minutes. And we've worked with tons of writers on it and wonderful talent, and we also have a conservatory that's within our film studio. And in the conservatory, we train actors from Tisch School of the Arts. So we put our young people together with a lot of new writers, and develop these. And they get licensed because they're short. So there's like so many, if you're looking at this from, how do I make something that finds an audience? There's so many ways, and I just think thinking creatively with what, I guess that's it.
I think to your point, you need to, Killer works with a lot of first-time filmmakers, first-time directors who may have had a bunch of shorts in their pocket and are ready to do their first feature. And we'll take that risk because it's a story that they have been dying to tell their entire lives. Knowing what is important to you, the thing that you have to get out into the world, start there. But also think about why is this the moment in time that this story needs to be told. If you can't see the narrative in which it's important for this moment, maybe take a step back and reassess and think why you're dying to tell it, and not necessarily creating with the audience in mind, but is there a space for it? Is it important to this moment?
How many people here have films in production right now? How many people have films in post? How many people here are producers? How many people are directors? How many people are writers? How many people wear several hats? How many people have films in the festival? How many people have distribution? Interesting. So I come from a very slow process. Oh, this is my last question. How many people have been working on their project for more than 5 years? Under 5 years. Okay, interesting. So the last film that we made through my company took 10 years to get to market. And we had an improbable problem, which is we were working with subject matter that had such a huge demographic that we needed to do, we knew we wanted to make a film that was very different from what people knew about the band The Who. And we also knew that people thought, there's no way you'll get this made. You won't be able to hang in there with this entity for long enough. So we were always countering this thing of like, oh, it's a Who film. Or like, what do you have with Pete and Roger? And do you have their consent? And all this stuff to just get to this very unlikely story that was really not, I mean, we thought we were making a rock manifesto, but we also thought we were making this relationship story that was just crazy and had nothing to do with music really at all. It had to do with creative risk. So our trajectory paralleled what was happening in the film. And all I can say is that we kept anybody out here who's made films, the ability to morph, like based on what happens and what hasn't happened, you have such an amazing skill set when you go into marketing. I think the thing that confused me was I thought marketing, it's like this thing out there that you have to know how to do. And what we learned was we had to apply our skill sets and our sort of unlikely way that we got stuff done and use that and fuse that into, so that we could feel connected to what we were putting out there. And then also the other thing that I think is hard in today's marketplace is we're really looking at what's acceptable instead of like, why do we make anything? We're trying to awaken something in ourselves and in other people. So it's keeping that fresh. And then, as I've heard here too, going to the people who see you and know you and starting to get a plan together. It could be a small, unlikely coalition. It doesn't have to be, oh, I've got to get out there to X or Y because this is how the thing gets out there. So I guess my takeaway is you market it the way you make it, and stay in touch with people who've been with you along the way. They'll help you a great deal.
So I want to ask a question individually to each of the panelists. So I'm going to start here with Josh. So my question to you is, we chatted on a podcast about distribution. What would you say in terms of finding a distributor or self-distribution? Do you prefer one over the other, or is it subjective depending on your project? What's your take on that? 'Cause I guess self-distribution now is more viable of an option than ever. With all the technology available to us. So what would you say? Self-distribution, find a distributor?
Well, it's certainly not a generality. Every project is its own flowchart problem set in both development, production, and marketing to distribution. So everything is situational, but I guess the most general answer I could give to that would be there are very few companies that actually bring added value to your distribution of your project, in my opinion anyways. There are a whole lot of really shitty companies that add no value, that are just literally looking to acquire content and throw it against the wall, and if it sticks, great, if not, move on. So gauging that is not impossible to do on your own. You can go through, just pull up IMDb, look at the filmography, and start randomly emailing filmmakers that they've worked with in different stages of that relationship, recent acquisitions, ones that are mature, 2, 3, 4 years into the deal, and then ones that are maybe kind of past tense towards the tail end of what would be maybe a 7 or 10 or 15-year deal, and get a feel for how they treat their filmmakers. And that is one very easy, simple way. And I know I literally have an email sitting in my inbox right now of someone asking me this about a company. And most filmmakers are very happy to tell you how their experience has been. Privately, of course, they don't, but they're very happy to tell you how things have went, good or bad, with a certain company. So it's not hard research to do, it just requires the legwork of doing it. And if your options, or if the options available to you, and every project is going to be different, are companies that you are getting feedback that suggest you don't want to be working with them, I think you are exponentially better off self-releasing and maximizing whatever you can do on your own, however you have to do it. Hopefully you've had a plan from the beginning of some kind. If you're forced into that route, you have some idea of what your audience is, who you want to reach out to, how you want to go about reaching out to them, et cetera, et cetera. That should be something you have in mind even before you start the process. So if those are your options, are companies that you don't want, that are seem like just throw it and stick companies, you are much better off, I think, releasing yourself. But there are, of course, companies and that add a whole great deal of value. Level that's handling Ask for Jane has done a beautiful job with everything they've done to date. So we're very happy with them, but they are a good company and they're hard to get the eye of. We've lucked into that. We happen to have Caroline Hirsch, who is one of our producers, owns Caroline's on Broadway, knows a lot of people because she's very wealthy and has worked in entertainment for a very long time, and she knew a guy who knows a guy over at Level and got them to look at it from a favorable, in a favorable context. So they took it on, I think, as a derivative of that, much more so than, we've been playing festivals for 6 months and your festival was gracious and loved it, when we won an award. And we played 20 festivals over the last 6 months, and we still didn't have a deal in place till that opportunity arose, just because of Caroline's ruthless effort to make this thing happen. So Yeah, it's situational, but do your homework. Don't be excited just because you have someone emailing you telling you they want to distribute your film. That means nothing.
So now my question for Jacob is, so you've had students who have sold scripts, option scripts, and things like that. Is there more to the process of selling a screenplay than just those 120 pages and whatnot? Like, do you think nowadays it's more important to have a full package that you're going to present to either an agent or a producer?
Everyone's worried about selling a script. And most people who are worried about selling a script are worried at completely the wrong time. Because most of the scripts that people are trying to sell are so far from ready. And so what ends up happening is the writers end up acting like used car salesmen, right? They're coming at it from a desperate place. They've got a great idea, right? And they're trying to change their life all at once with a big, with a big sale that's going to change everything so they can quit their job. And what you have to come back to is, you have to come back to the product. What are you actually selling? And you have to look at it and say, have I actually, one of the ways I like to know if my script is done, is I like to think of what's the budget? And let's say it's a low budget movie. Let's say it's $1 million film.
Is that low?
Right? Maybe I work too big. But let's say it's a $100,000 film. That means each page of your script is worth $1,000, right? That means each line of your script, each paragraph, each little stanza is worth like $100. So you can ask yourself, if somebody said to me, would you rather have this one image or $100? Would you take the $100 or would you take the image? Or would you take that line of dialogue? And if you take the $100, or obviously as you go up, $1,000, $1 million, right? If you take the money, it means that you're asking somebody else to do something that you're not willing to do, right? You're asking somebody to invest in something that isn't really there. But if you actually do the work and you actually get your script, I like to think, especially as a new writer, your script has to be better than the professionals. Your script you have to do more work. And you actually get your script to the place where every single moment is worth the money. If you actually think about it like a poem, where every line is actually that important and that tied into everything else, then you have something very rare, which is you actually have a producible script that doesn't need to be changed, that doesn't need to be rewritten, even though you'll get tons of notes. You have something that works as a product, and then you can feel confident that, trust me, even the professional writers out there aren't hawking scripts that are ready to go. That you've got something really special. And then it's about connecting to the people who are like you. Don't work with people you don't like. They'll make your life miserable. They'll seem like, oh my God, they're so famous and they've got so much money, and they will destroy your life. And that person that you just met at Big Apple Film Festival, who doesn't have any more connections than you do but is passionate about your project, that's the person that's going to help you. So, we're only as good as our communities, and you want to build those long-term connections. You want to play the long-term game, and yeah, of course, you want to develop your library of scripts, not just one. Because what's going to end up happening is you're finally going to get that meeting with that producer, that agent, that manager, that person you need to meet with, and they're going to go, oh, this is great. What else do you have? And you want to have a library that's ready to go. And when you finally do get an agent or a manager, you're going to want to be able to be put up for work for hire work and rewrites and all that kind of stuff. So you're going to need writing samples. But the big thing to remember is not to be desperate, to be calm, right? To think, is my script ready to go? Well, if it is, then it's just about finding the people who are looking for what I've got, who are looking to make this kind of thing.
All right. So my next question is for Matt. So as Matt told you earlier, he is involved with live events, pairing film with live scores. So on that note, right, the theatrical market right now, obviously to release a film theatrically is very expensive. What can filmmakers do if they do choose to go the theatrical route and you're an independent filmmaker, and you're not making a movie like The Avengers, right? What kind of things can filmmakers do to get people into the theater, right? And one of the, like what you're doing, I feel like the live scores, I think, is one great idea. What are some other things that filmmakers can do to really, you know, to get people into the cinema?
I think a lot of it honestly has to do with how many options you're willing to give yourself to when you're especially creating something. I mean, for me, on the live event production standpoint, I'm less involved in the actual creation of the film, but I'm in a process right now where I have a production company who wants to create an original documentary for me and have the premiere of the film be the physical tour itself, and then have the option to sell into markets after. Which is extremely interesting because there hasn't really been something like that. So as far as getting people in the door and getting people interested as far as filmmaking, I think it's just surrounding yourself with as much talent as you possibly can. And I completely agree, you shouldn't work with people that you don't like, even though sometimes those people are the ones who are financing a lot of it. It just makes life difficult, and if you can find different avenues for bringing in various types of talent, or the way that you market things, that for me, the way that we're really successful and the way that we're able to sell tickets to these types of events is how you market it and how you sell it and how the public perceives it. So if you have a director that's willing to do interviews, to do Q&As, to do talk shows, or if you have your producers or talent that want to be a part of that process and not just think unilaterally, like what I'm trying to get across to some filmmakers and directors is that this is like a great, what I can help them do as far as live events is this is another great way to help continue to build your brand, to make it more versatile. Even after it's out of theaters, we can still then license it and put it back into theaters once again, but into a different type of format. So thinking creatively along those lines, it doesn't necessarily have to be score driven. If it's a documentary, there's other types of things that you can do as far as speaking engagements or Q&As that you can pair it with the film that we can potentially tour. It's how willing you are to change and how willing you are to let something that you've built and you've touched kind of meld over into another production company like the one that we run, but work very creatively and openly and honestly with each other. It's all about transparency, because what I'm trying to do is, I'm not trying to take your IP or take your brand, I'm trying to help you elevate it and get it into more markets that it not necessarily would have been in the first place.
And so for Lisa, you made films that had some name talent, right? And of course we know that that's an essential part very often of getting a film made and getting a film distributed. You've worked with Christopher Lloyd, Jeff Daniels, Elizabeth Moss, right? So what advice would you have for aspiring filmmakers in attracting that name talent? How to get, you know, these marketable names attached to your script?
Well, I started as an actor, and so I knew actors. So just to subscribe to that world of people that you know. And I think actors really like great scripts, and they like meaty roles. And I think that in the commercial world, they get offered a lot of things that sometimes they'll do for different reasons, because it gets them more exposure. Miles Teller, who came out of our studio, told me recently, he said, well, I was doing all these independent films and I can barely make a living. So he said, so I'll do a film like these big Divergent films and stuff like that. But he says, I do very little acting. And so he really does do it to make more money and then go back and do, independent films. So actors that's how I made my first feature. I thought about who would like the script, maybe, and so I got Paul Sorvino, and he ended up not being in the movie, but he was a champion for me. And then all these other people started looking at it, and the same thing with Rain Without Thunder. I knew Christine Lottie from Ensemble Studio Theater. She loved it, and then she got another film, but at that point we already got our producers because of Christine. And so it really does help, when you have an actor. And I think if you write character descriptions as well as parts that have a lot of layers, you know, which is what I'm interested in doing anyway, you know, whether it's in directing or not. But and just finding out how to get scripts to people. Like I'm working on a play right now, and you know, I just had to wait it out to find the right actress. And then Victoria Clark, you know, like the script, and now she's working on it. She's not a big movie actress yet, but she's a Broadway actress. You know, so I just think, and you find someone that knows someone, you can all go to the theater. Actors also who are working in New York in the theater, go see their plays, you know, slip things at intermission. I mean, you know, or afterwards. There's just always ways to be to meet people, because it really is. I think what I remember when I met Paul Sorvino, so he wanted to have a meeting with me, and you know, they just want to know that like you're someone that they can work with. So sometimes just meeting somebody really helps. When I was working on this series Dot that I've been developing, where we have some influencers. So I just did Skype interviews with people, and I was just like, let's just talk. And so that we could actually talk in Skype so they'd feel comfortable with me and I'd feel comfortable with them. So I think once people meet you, you know, it's like, oh yeah, I could really work. They don't have to be famous, or, you know, if it's your first film or your second film.
So for Sydney, Sydney's with Killer Films, and Killer's developed some very wonderful, amazing, legendary films over the years. Academy Award nominations.
Can't take credit for it.
And I think the first film from Killer Films that I saw was Boys Don't Cry, which was back in the 90s, I believe. So anyway, you know, now, you know, in sort of the climate we're in now, would you say? Actually, I have two questions. Let me start with this one. Do you think theatrical is still a necessity in some way for independent films to really rise above? Because there's so much now out there that you can go on YouTube and find out information about something, or, you know, there's so much on Netflix. Do you think that you still need a theatrical release in order to really be noticed, so to speak?
So we really encourage our creators to step away from the idea of being a filmmaker, right? That we're all tied to this. Oh, thank you. People are tied to the idea of being a filmmaker. I make films, you know. And sometimes a story is better served by a different mode of better as a TV show, or maybe a limited series, or ongoing, or a web series, or maybe it's an Instagram story. I don't know. But we encourage our people that we work with to let go of this idea of only working within the film format. And to your question in terms of theatrical release or not, I think Netflix is proving this. Some projects are better served without a theatrical release. The Kissing Booth, I would not have paid to go see that movie, to be perfectly honest. It's not my jam. But I loved watching it in my living room, and even hate watching it and having my roommate like beg me to turn it off, but we're still watching. It's like a car wreck, we can't stop. But that drew a lot more eyes, and I think a lot of people outside of its immediate audience probably watched that film because it was on Netflix and available to them. I think in other instances, like First Reformed is a really good example. When A24 acquired that Paul Schrader's last film, they were not going to do a theatrical release, and at the last minute decided to do that, to give it a theatrical release, and I think it made all the difference for that particular project, and it did relatively well. So it really depends on what the story is, who you're trying to reach. Sometimes it doesn't need to be in the theater, and I think that's okay.
The other question I have, by the way, because I mentioned Boys Don't Cry. Yes. Kimberly Pierce has done a short film, I believe, when she was at Columbia, and then it became a feature. Does your company or production companies in general still look at short films as something, as a possibility to then turn it into a feature? Will you go to Sundance or Tribeca or whatever and look at a short film and say, hey, maybe we should talk to the filmmaker and making it into a feature?
Absolutely. I think having a short to use as a calling card almost is a really great tool. If you make a short version of the feature that you're trying to make, you can send the feature script along with the short version to give a really great idea of your creative ability. We see that a lot, where someone's already gone ahead and made the short, you get a really good sense of who they are as a filmmaker, the story they're trying to tell, and you get to read the feature script and go, okay, I can totally like see the whole thing. But we do really, part of my job is working in development. We do track all the film festivals, all of the shorts. We will meet a lot of filmmakers just off of their short films. It's really, you want to keep an eye on who's doing exciting work even at that level.
So for Loretta, so your documentary, it premiered at Sundance, and now it's in release Sony Pictures. Okay, so for example, your documentary is on The Who, right? Now,
It's on the managers, the original managers.
Managers, okay.
It features the remaining members of the Who as
Okay.
well.
So there, let's say I go onto Google, I type, and I want information, right, on the band, their managers, or whatever it might be, right? I can find out information. So what separates a documentary feature film? Like if somebody's making a documentary film, how do you separate it from all of the other information you can get and make someone say, I'm gonna go rent this on Amazon, or I'm gonna go to the theater and pay money to go see it?
It's a great question because I don't know. When we started making this film, there were maybe 100 books on the Who. How many films, how much out there in terms of media if you're going to Google the Who. So Sony had their own release pattern, but just as a producer, I had this idea. The film would be acquired and I would get to stop. That did not happen. What was interesting is, again, that morphing learning. It was like, oh, okay, we're going to parallel this release. So we built on these demographics. So we had Sony picked up 5 territories, Lionsgate picked up Western Europe, we had a UK distributor do theatrical in the UK, and we did all kinds of things. I mean, in the UK, they went out to all the vinyl, like the hip vinyl places, and they got everybody who was interested in vinyl. We did a partnership with Ben Sherman, so we did a fashion partnership. We did something with AEG Live when the Who was playing in Hyde Park. We found ways to partner. Once we were out there and the film was going to be having a life, then we could get in there and get creative. We also, through Facebook, we geo-targeted, so we bought advertising. When we were going into the different cities and towns and stuff in the UK, for example, a couple days before we would hit the theaters, we would boost. And what's so great about social media is you can actually get the data. You can see how much traction you're getting and how much interest you're getting. So it's such a tool now. And since we've been out and gone through all the windows, which now are collapsed much more quickly, the whole podcasting thing is an amazing tool. And we also, during the release, we had different characters from the film opening at different theaters. So we also had Terrence Stamp, who's the brother of Chris Stamp, who was the main character really in the film. So he had a really strong following just in the movie and the theater world. So we used different people at different times to promote and kind of be ambassadors to the film.
So let me give an opportunity. Does anybody have any questions for any of the speakers? Anyone on the phone? All right, well, let me start. Go ahead.
How you doing? So my question is, for artists, writers, directors, and filmmakers who are trying to want to acquire an agent, if a big agency wants to pick them up, and do you feel like they should go with the bigger agency, knowing that the bigger agency is going to be focused more on their clients that are already bringing them money? Or should they focus on getting to a agency that may not be necessarily known?
I think it is less to do on the agency, it's more the individual that will be representing you. Because a lot of the times, especially, it doesn't have to be just filmmakers, producers, it's any form of talent that's looking for representation. I don't think it necessarily has to be the first person that reaches out to you that shows interest, and you can be picky because you're the client and what you want is something that they need to deliver on, and you need to be able to trust them and make sure that they're not lying to you so that they give it to you real, which I've experienced that many times in my life and in my work life where people tell vague little white lies that lead into bigger ones, and then you're like sitting in the corner being like, what the fuck, how did this snowball? So I think, yes, there are advantages to going with bigger agencies, just because they have a little more bandwidth, they have a little more outreach, they have the quote-unquote relationships. But I think it really depends on how much the individual who's representing you believes in you, is pushing for you, and the team that surrounds them. So it's not just, so if you're going with a younger agent, it's always great to be, something that's always appreciated, especially on my end, is like I love introducing producers or directors that I'm working with, not necessarily my clients because I'm representing the IP, but introducing them to my boss to see, like, let them know it's not just me, it's a larger picture. And have them not be afraid to ask for help, because no one in this world can do anything alone. It's all about working copacetically with each other. So obviously, like, I think me working for Endeavor, which is like the world's biggest agency, an entertainment company, like, yes, there's like a large amount of advantages to it because of so many different people in so many different realms. So, but it really comes down to who's your day-to-day, who's representing you. That's where you're going to derive most of your happiness or most of your anger from.
Yes.
I'm a little curious about this live event business because it seems music has morphed into that direction. Their releases are sort of lost leaders and they're making their money off of their events. And it sounds like you're finding a way to cross film into that model so that you can create these events and distribute through event venues. Do you put, does the package arrive completed, or do you put sometimes the composer with a film project because you think there could be then potential to create these events afterward, or do you get the whole project completed?
So we normally in the past we've always done it where the film is completed, it's with whoever composed it, it's with whoever directed it, and then the studios or the licensors will send us all the assets, whether it's the video files, the DME stem, the music stems, and then we'll then hire an arranger and a tech team to build it while we will continuously monitor them. What I've been trying to do as far as, because I work for Endeavor Content, which is like our in-house movie studio and production company, and we're trying to build more bandwidth and build more content, not just for my department, but just in general, is from the start of production, whether they think it's something that we can tailor into a live event, whether it's a really interesting documentary, or whether it's a feature, or a musical, or a kid's film, getting in there early with the creatives and saying, like, this is something that we think we might want to do as a live event. Let's make sure that we're tailoring it the right way. So it's just all about communication from the start. And especially when you're working with composers, we're obviously submitting them, and we're also, I'm in their ear 24/7 being like, hey, like, once this comes to fruition, I'm gonna reach out and make sure that there's a market for this title, this IP, and then you're gonna be directly involved in the creative process of building the live show, and also compensated, since the highlight of this event is the music of it. So a lot of the times, like, when you're selling a film, you're mainly looking at the director, the direct talent, who the studio is, and sometimes the composer gets glossed over. So it's a really, like, beautiful chance to bring them to market and bring them into a live space where they can openly talk about their process of creating the score or creating the soundtrack, and then seeing that come live and having that be the main focus of this event, while obviously we make sure that the pixels in the film are still beautiful and nice for everyone. So yeah, it's kind of a mixture of both, but I'm trying to lean towards more the original content side. toyed with the idea of having like a short film act as an opener to a feature. The only issue with that is, well, it's the only issue is in North America, because how Symphony, we predominantly sell to symphonies and orchestras because they already have affiliations with halls, they help control the calendar of those venues, and symphonies and orchestras in North America can range anywhere between $40,000 to $150,000 for a buyer to rent. So they're extremely, extremely expensive, and their union rules pretty much say that they go into overtime after 2.5 hours of performance. And I think over time each player gets somewhere around $250 to $300, and if you have 60 people on stage and every minute that you're in, it starts to tag up. So it's tough because a lot of these, it's hard to sell to a buyer that when you're having like an hour film, or if you just want to do a short, because your audience is going to be in their seats for 30 minutes and then the show ends. It doesn't really translate as well. But I really want pairing it, yes. Yes, that is something that I've been trying to do, and even in IMAX films, because they're 40 minutes long, taking 2 IMAX films from the same distributor and putting them into a live event. Act 1 is this one, and Act 2 is this one, and that's one way that we can get around it and make it work. It just has to be the right type of content, and we want to make sure we're doing market research to make sure that we're filling a 1,500 cap venue.
It has to be a symphony.
It doesn't have to. It could be a rock band, it could be a jazz band. We have La La Land, and it's a symphony and orchestra, or a symphony and jazz band pairing because of how rigorous some of those notes are to play. And so we make sure that we staff players who can actually play.
All right, we have some questions back. Yes. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
If you had to choose one form of advertising, since this is about finding your audience, if you could only choose one, billboard, social media, what would you choose?
I mean, one of the beautiful things about having a distributor is you can kind of, they are the expertise on this, but it seems like they are using a lot of social targeting. I mean, like you said, the fact that you can actually see where it's going, see who's consuming it, see who's engaging it, is a whole new level of understanding of the marketplace that I think that allots that we've never had with any of those other mediums that are more archaic, you know. So I think just logically that seems more attractive to me, but again, that's not my level of expertise. I wouldn't want to speak for our distributor.
It's easy for me on this particular film, it was radio. There's such a sophistication in the people who are having conversations, and they are excited and ambassadors, and it's amazing, and I think the podcast phenomenon really bears that out. And when you're in someone's ear, there's something very intimate about it. It's been some of the best experiences that we've had.
Yes, in the back.
With the rise of streaming services and kind of the phenomenon of binging, have you seen a shift on the producer side or on the network side of pushing stories more towards serialization versus like a standalone film because of the way that like a series can build an audience kind of over time? And do you see things like Netflix, Hulu, are they pushing more for kind of serial content, or are they still kind of really, really interested in standalone films? Or have you seen a shift in terms of like them pushing writers to present more serialized topics or more like miniseries kind of stuff versus like a film that is kind of what it is, that isn't going to kind of build an audience over multiple seasons?
I think it's kind of a nice mixture of both, in all honesty, especially like past year. Look at what Netflix had on its channels, all the other distributors, all the Disney movies, and now they're pretty much slotting in all their own original content, and Hulu's following. Disney Plus is about to launch, which is going to do exactly the same thing. So I think we're in the age of content, which is exciting because you're seeing all these original series and documentaries and features coming out, but there isn't really, on my side, there isn't really a true format as like what's going to work, because like Kissing Booth, for example, like yeah, it had a really good opening and it has good numbers like as far as streaming, but like I also don't really like that film. it's a trial by error, and like I think it really depends as far as what they want to put out and what really bites. HBO crushes Game of Thrones, most expensive. I think the fight scene between the White Walkers and the humans, there was a $155 million budget for one episode. That's ridiculous. People are throwing money at content.
It was a great episode.
Really privileged to say, from the standpoint of a production company who's known for film, specifically films, we are trying to create more television, because that's what we're told is where the industry is going and how people are consuming more content right now. Having said that, we're making more films than we ever have, so I don't know. I will also say serialized content, from just trying to get into more of the television game, unless you have like George Clooney standing next to Brad Pitt, strewn across Julia Roberts, it's really hard to do a limited series, particularly period. That's a rough combo, as we are learning time and time again right now.
I'd love to jump in on that, because I get this question all the time. Should I write this movie? Should I write this movie? Should I write a series? Should I write? And at the end of the day, you should write what you're going to write really well. If you watch a ton of TV and you love TV and you're interested in how do you build an engine, and that stuff excites you, and you're interested in telling these stories in this way, then you should write a TV show. And if you want to write something that builds to a catharsis and is self-contained, you should write a feature, because it's so hard to break into this industry. It's so hard to get your break that if you're trying to time the market and figure out like what's happening right now, but by the time all the stars line up for you, something else is going to be happening. But if you stay true to yourself and you keep on writing the things that you're passionate about and excited about, and that doesn't mean to be stupid. Like if you've got one idea that seems like super easy and another that seems really, really hard, and you're equally passionate about both of them, write the one that's easier. But if you're not, if you're more passionate about the thing that seems hard, if you keep on doing the stuff you're attracted to, it's so much easier when it comes time to think about like what's your brand, because your brand is going to grow out of all that stuff that you've been doing, and your writing is going to be better, and your filmmaking is going to be better, because you're actually speaking to your personal truth rather than trying to figure out what everybody else is doing.
You got a question here? Yes. Yeah.
Just because when I was working on Rerun, I had to do some special effects for snow, and I wanted all the time I could with my actors, Christopher Lloyd, and so I was like, oh, we'll do it in post. We'll put the snow in post. Well, it's very expensive. So what I learned was it was way over our heads what we wanted to do, and it wasn't a whole lot of time, but with moving, I won't get into it, it would have been, it's about $300,000, which was just not something we could. So you just put your thinking caps on. So what I did was, I was like, I gotta know somebody, and so I said, I know the chair of the film department at NYU. Let me see if he'll give me his top animated student who just, special effects person. But like, you could go to, you partner with the top people in a program that are looking for good stories. And if you have a good story, That's how you can get to know people. And because there are great young people coming out of schools, be it an animator, a special effects person, a cinematographer. I worked with 2 different cinematographers on one of my films because there were 2 distinct parts to it. And one of them was a long-term person that I'd worked with, and the other one came right out of NYU, and he was brilliant, you know. So, and he was particularly passionate, like you were saying, because it was his first feature, and he was just like pulling out all the stops. So I would go to, you know, not just NYU, but SVA. There's all sorts of people to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I would second that. I've done that before too. My first couple of films, the opening title sequence, which is a kind of VFX-y type situation where, yeah, we didn't have the money for that. It's a very costly thing when you're going to the professional level. And yes, I mean, I think you guys were discussing that students are dying to get the first rung on the ladder, and they are going to be incredibly enthusiastic. And yeah, we emailed, for All God's Creatures, the first film I produced, we emailed the heads of the film departments of all the schools in town and said, here's what the situation is. There's no money involved. And we had a ton of submissions. And the woman who ended up doing the title sequence, it's my favorite part of the movie. To be honest, we made that movie for 30 grand, and it's the best part. It's the best sequence of the movie by far, in my opinion. And that was a student at Columbia. So.
All right, I just have just one last question in terms of building your audience. If a filmmaker or a screenwriter has a concept and they start a social media campaign and they look at their Instagram account and it's at 0, it's day 1, what's some of the first steps they should take to start building that audience?
The people you know. They're going to be the ones who care about you and your stuff the most. So start there, and I mean, yeah, that's only, I mean, what is the other option other than paying, you know?
But also, you're a filmmaker, so make cool shit, right? But also think, make sure you're not putting the cart before the horse, right? I probably wouldn't build a social media campaign for a script. I would try to get the script great. And you know, you were asking the question about an animator, and I think it's a great idea to bring in an animator, but I would also look at how am I putting these images on the page in a way that people can visualize it easily. If you read the script for Frozen, for example, and Frozen's not one of my favorite movies, but if you read that script, my God, she's a master, you know, and it's so sparse, but you can see everything on the page without even having to be creative yourself. And so what I'd say is, first make sure your content is there. Then honestly, I wouldn't make an Instagram page for my script, but I might shoot a scene. I might make a short version. I might make a trailer. I would try to use my filmmaking skills to get that stuff out there, but also knowing what your skills are. Maybe you're a better networker, you know, and maybe you, instead of trying to build your audience, maybe you use your networking skills to meet the people who can help you. So it's really about going like, where are my strengths and where are the connections that I already have, and who are my friends? Maybe it's really just about getting to one actor who you've got a perfect role for. And somebody in your 6 degrees of separation knows that person or knows their assistant. So it's about really focusing your approach, because if you try to do everything with social media, you'll never have time to make a film, and you'll never have time to write. All your time's just going to be going to marketing.
Yeah, social media is interesting, especially for people who are around the same age as me, and it's really weird to see these random people like Jake Paul or Lele Pons who just created like these weird followings off of Vine and then transitioned over to Instagram, which is now like really dominating the space as far as follows. And a big thing that agents and big companies look at is what numbers do you have, who's looking at your stuff. And so it really, for me, I hate when people would just post like those generic, like, oh my God, I just got a new puppy, like, come look at it and give me likes because this thing's cute. I'm more interested in like the Anya Kopians of the world who create those digital shorts and then can translate that into different areas of her work, whether it's creating a documentary series or whether it's shooting shorts for brands like Red Bull or going into festivals and taking different shorts or shots like that. It's a really interesting way of actually getting noticed, and what people will judge you silently what you post. So care about what you're putting out into the internet because it's not going to go away. Everyone knows that now. There's this whole thing with like data privacy, but like it's not really a thing in my mind. But I think it's just as far as if you're starting fresh, you're at the 0 followers, yes, definitely lean on your friends and family, lean on all your coworkers, be the shameless plug, especially at the beginning, because it's all about hustling and grinding it out and presenting yourself with like how much shame do you want to put up with for the ultimate reward, but also staying true to your values and not deviating from the path of I'm just posting this to get likes and nowhere else rather than for a greater good of this could get me noticed. Maggie Rogers, for example, got noticed by Pharrell off of a YouTube video, and now she's incredibly famous. There's so many different avenues that you can go down. It's just be creative, have fun with it, and be yourself. Yeah.
I know I personally find social media really time consuming, but I have a very like Joni Mitchell kind of view of things, you know, like I always loved how like she did her own, and also Kubrick too, who, you know, like Clockwork Orange didn't do well until he redid the whole campaign himself, because it can't have come from his vision. I like the way she always did her own album covers, because it came from a very true place. And I think Kubrick really became like that. He didn't need huge everything. He would want it to actually be smaller so that he could, you know, be true to his vision and not get all busy with everything. And I find it a little daunting and overwhelming, and sometimes I think, oh, we have to pay somebody to do it for us, but it takes time, because I don't want, even if we have someone on staff to do it, I don't want someone to do something that I don't check with. So I find that it is distracting from the work. Yeah.
Oh, I would just say, think about what is your story rooted in? Is there a community there? And then to play devil's advocate, you might not want to have a social media presence until the thing is in the world. We just premiered a film at Tribeca, the film festival, that was based on a novel. There was a fictionalized account of Patty Hearst's lost year when she was kidnapped. And Patty Hearst has personally shot down a lot of other projects that were more outspokenly about her. We didn't want to put that in the world until the thing was, you know, premiered and we were ready for an audience. So that director did not have a social media presence for her film at all.
Yeah, I think they're a combination of everything that I'm hearing here. I think it's a slippery slope if you're working on something and it's an original idea, and it's got a slow creeping awareness on social media. It can dilute it. The idea is, especially if you're a small production, to look a lot bigger than you are. So it needs to be strategic. And if you're crowdfunding, maybe there's something on social media that could be a little bit of a teaser. I think teasers are great. Mystery is great. But when I would really start in earnest would be when I'm applying to submitting the film to festivals. So as I'm getting into that festival run, I can maximize there, because you don't want it to be a deterrent, and you don't want someone to look at it and say, well, people aren't really responding to this, so I won't go see it at the festival, and I'm a buyer.
Wrap it up. All right, so thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you all. There's right next door is a place called Counter Bodega. We have some complimentary food there, some discounted drinks available. So if you want, you can go right next door to Counter Bodega. Thank you very much. Thank you all.